My name is William Carter, and I am a World War II veteran. But before any title, I am a man who has carried the scars of D-Day on my skin and in my soul. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, the sea was darker than ever. The rocking of the boat and the salty scent of the water mixed with the oil from our rifles and the cold sweat of the men around me. No one spoke. We only heard the roar of the engines and, from time to time, a whispered prayer. We knew that once we stepped off that ramp, our lives would change forever, if we were lucky enough to come back at all. The sergeant's order came sharp. Get ready. My hands were sweaty, my heart pounding inside my chest. The deafening sound of artillery fire already filled the air before we even set foot on the sand. When the ramp finally dropped, hell opened up before our eyes. The first round of gunfire cut down the men in front of me like they were paper. I jumped into the freezing water, feeling my body sink under the weight of my gear. The smell of gunpowder and burning metal mixed with the stench of death. I screamed, but my voice was lost in the chaos. I crawled across the beach, each step a battle between craters from explosions and lifeless bodies. There were screams everywhere, but it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. I saw men dragging themselves without legs, others clutching their own entrails, calling for their mothers like children. There was no heroism there, only the desperation to survive the next second. I reached a barbed wire barrier and curled up behind it, trying to catch my breath. My rifle was covered in sand, my hands shaking. I looked to my side and saw my best friend, Charlie, lying still, his eyes fixed on the sky. A single bullet to the head. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, but there was no time for grief. Move forward, Carter. The lieutenant's voice snapped me out of my paralysis. I didn't know how, but I had to cross that beach. Every meter felt like a mile, and every second stretched into eternity. Grenades exploded close enough to throw me to the ground, and bullets zipped past my ear like deadly insects. Looking back, I can't say how long it took until we finally reached the cover of the dunes. When I collapsed there, exhausted and covered in blood, some mine, some not, a single thought hit me like a bullet. I survived. But deep down, I knew that a part of me had been left on that beach forever. D-Day was only the beginning of a war that would last another long year. But in that moment, all I knew was that the fight had only just begun. Can you imagine what it's like to stare death in the eyes and push forward anyway? Tell me in the comments what you think you would have done in that moment. Surviving D-Day wasn't a victory. It was just a ticket to the next hell. The Normandy landing was only the beginning. After that, there was no rest, no respite. We marched through the war-torn lands of France, pushing forward against an enemy that knew every inch of that territory. The stench of death became part of the air we breathed. Bodies rotted in the fields, mixed with mud, and the twisted metal of destroyed tanks. The sound of gunfire never truly stopped. If it wasn't ours, it was theirs. By day, we faced ambushes. By night, we slept with our fingers on the trigger. The slightest noise sent our hearts racing, and many of us woke up screaming from nightmares that didn't end when we opened our eyes. My platoon marched down roads covered in dirty snow and dry blood. Winter came brutally, and our uniforms weren't made to withstand that kind of cold. Our fingers went numb, our lips cracked. Our boots were always wet, and many lost their feet to frostbite before they lost them to enemy bullets. I remember one night in particular. We had taken a small French village, a place that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The houses were destroyed, and the few remaining villagers looked at us with hollow, hopeless eyes. A boy, no older than 10, watched us from behind a broken door. I handed him a piece of bread from my ration. He took it, but he didn't smile. At that moment, I realized he had seen more war than anyone should in an entire lifetime. The Germans left nothing behind. When they retreated, they buried mines in the roads and left soldiers hiding among the ruins. We lost good men to invisible traps. One frozen morning, my friend Thomas was walking ahead of me when we heard a metallic click. He froze, looked at me, and I saw in his eyes that he knew. There was no time for anything. The explosion came in a roar, scattering pieces of him in every direction. What war does to us is something no one can understand without living it. We weren't just fighting the Germans. We were fighting hunger, cold, fear, and above all, ourselves. With each passing day, we felt less. Pain became background noise. The only thing keeping us standing was a promise that one day it would all be over. But deep down, I knew war never truly ends for those who lived it. When the war ended, I didn't feel joy. There was no celebration inside me, just an emptiness I couldn't name. We received the news of Germany's surrender on a cold morning, and many soldiers cheered, threw their helmets in the air, embraced each other as if they had just been reborn. But I stood there, still, feeling the weight of months of battle clinging to my skin like a second layer of dirt that would never wash away. The journey back home felt like a strange dream. The world outside remained the same. The streets were intact. People smiled. Newspapers printed headlines of victory. But inside me, nothing felt real. The faces of those I lost were still with me. I heard my comrades' voices in the silence of the night, smelled gunpowder in the air even when all around me was the scent of a warm dinner. My mother cried when she saw me. My father hugged me tightly and said he was proud. My brothers looked at me with admiration as if I were a hero, but I didn't feel like one. A hero comes home with his soul intact. I came back broken. The first nights were the worst. The sound of a car outside made me jump out of bed, drenched in cold sweat. Shadows on the walls looked like enemy soldiers lurking in the dark. I slept with a knife under my pillow, as if I were still on the front lines. Sometimes I woke up screaming, my heart pounding, my eyes wide like a trapped animal. My mother would cry softly at my bedroom door. My father tried to understand, but he didn't know what to say. I walked through the streets of my hometown, and everything seemed so small. Before the war, those houses were my whole world. Now, they looked like fragile models, disconnected from the brutal reality I had come to know. I saw young men my age laughing, flirting with girls, living lives that felt so distant from mine. I envied them, yet at the same time, I felt like a stranger among them, as if I had returned to a world I no longer belonged to. I tried to go back to my routine, but nothing made sense. Hot food, clean clothes, a safe roof over my head. Everything felt like a luxury I didn't deserve to get used to. I didn't know how to explain it to anyone. I didn't know how to say that sometimes I wished I were back in the trenches because at least there I knew who I was. Out here, I was just a stranger trying to remember how to live. Time passed, but the war never left me. It was in the details, in the silence that filled the moments when I was supposed to be happy, in the sound of rain that reminded me of nights spent in muddy trenches, in the smell of smoke that brought back the images of bodies burning in destroyed tanks. I tried to work. I got a job at a small factory in town. It was simple, repetitive, exactly what I needed. But every time someone tapped me on the shoulder unexpectedly, my body reacted as if I were under attack. My hands trembled when holding heavy tools, as if they were still gripping a rifle. The noise of the machines sounded like gunfire. I would go to the bathroom to wash my face and stare at my reflection, trying to find the man I used to be before the war. But he was no longer there. The nightmares never stopped. In the middle of the night, I would wake up with the scent of blood burned into my memory, feeling the weight of a helmet that was no longer on my head. Now and then, I thought I could hear the voices of my friends calling me. Charlie, Thomas, the men I watched die before my eyes. I saw them in my dreams, and when I woke up, I felt guilty for still being alive. My family tried to help. My mother cooked my favorite meals. My father talked about football, trying to pull me back into a normal life. But how could I explain to them that after seeing what I had seen, nothing felt normal anymore? I distanced myself from people. I isolated myself. It was easier that way. No more trying to explain. No more pretending everything was fine. I started wandering the streets alone, without direction, lost inside my own mind. It was an old veteran from the First World War who brought me back to reality. I found him sitting on a park bench, smoking a cigarette with the calmness of a man who had already seen the worst the world had to offer. He glanced at me and said, "The war never ends for those who came back from it, but you're still here, so find a reason." Those words hit me like a bullet to the chest. A reason? I didn't have one, but maybe it was time to start looking. I decided I needed to do something for the men who returned from war like I did. I started attending veterans meetings, listening to their stories, sharing mine, and I realized I wasn't alone, that we all carried the war inside us, but that together, maybe we could find a way to move forward. The war never truly ends for those who lived it, but there is a way to keep going. One day at a time, one battle at a time. Life never went back to the way it was. But little by little, I began to understand that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. I would carry the war inside me forever, but I had to learn how to live with it. The meetings with other veterans became my anchor. There, we didn't have to pretend. We didn't have to put on a smile and say everything was fine. Every glance exchanged carried the understanding of someone who knew exactly what the other was feeling. No words needed. I met men who, like me, fought against the ghosts of trenches. Some drowned themselves in alcohol, trying to silence the memories. Others lost everything: family, jobs, hope. But I also met those who found a new purpose. Men who helped other veterans, who worked to ensure that future generations understood the true cost of freedom. That's how I found a new path. I started telling my story, not just to those who had returned, but to those who had never gone, to those who grew up hearing about the heroism of war, without knowing the pain that came after. I was invited to speak at schools, to tell young people what it really means to put on a uniform and step onto a battlefield without knowing if you'll ever come back. I saw in their eyes the same admiration I had seen in my brother's eyes when I returned home. But this time, I made sure to show them that war is not just about glory and medals. It is sacrifice. It is loss. It is a wound that never fully heals. With time, I started sleeping better. The nightmares still came, but they no longer paralyzed me like before. A sudden touch on my shoulder still made me flinch, but I could take a deep breath and remind myself that I was safe. I am no longer the young man who landed in Normandy on that June morning. I am a man shaped by war, but not defined by it. I have learned that courage is not just about facing bullets and explosions. It is about looking at yourself and choosing to keep going. Today, when I look back, I see that surviving was not the end of my mission. It was the beginning of another battle. The battle to find meaning in everything I lived through. And that is a battle I continue to fight one day at a time.